This is Duke University.
Started. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in celebration of Latinx Heritage Month. My name is Viridiana Rodriguez, and I serve as Vice Chair of Special Initiatives for the Duke University Hispanic Latino Alumni Association, also known as DULA. In collaboration with Gente, the Latinx student organization on campus, we're excited to present this panel of accomplished alumni who will be sharing their experiences at Duke and throughout their careers. I will now introduce Laura Poma Gomez, who is going to serve as our moderator for this evening. Laura is class of 2024 and serves as the Community Interactions and Alumni Affairs Chair for Mi Gente, and is a student representative on the DULA board. Laura, take it away.
Thank you, Verdi. I would like to say again, hello to everyone, good afternoon. We're very excited to be joined by our three panelists, Monique, Sebastian, and Maria. And our introduction slides. Thank you, Stacey. So our first panelist is going to be Monique Barrios Taylor from Duke class of 2012. She's currently working at Goldman Sachs as in the investment banking division in healthcare. Our next panelist will be Maria Cardona, Duke class of 88, working at CNN and CNN Español as a political commentator and being a principal at the Dewey Square Group and the founder of Latinovations. Our next will be Sebastian Celis, Duke class of 14. He's currently a fourth-year dental student at the Columbia University College of Dental Medicine. And so we will be first starting with Monique Barrios Taylor. So my first question for Monique would be, can you share a bit about yourself, a little bit about your hometown, your Latinx identity, and how you've arrived at your career today?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to meet you all. Unfortunately, I cannot see your faces, but it's such a pleasure to be here on behalf of Duke. As Laura mentioned, my name is originally Monique Barrios, recently got married, graduated in 2012, originally from a very small town called Ramona, California, which is in inland San Diego, predominantly Mexican and white population. I identify as Chicana. I'm a first generation Mexican-American. Both of my parents are from Mexico, as are my grandparents. I'm really excited to be here today. I had a very interesting experience at Duke. I think in a lot of ways, you guys will laugh at this. I think this is the right group to share this with. I didn't know what anything outside of a Mexican was when I went to Duke. I grew up in Southern California. One of the first things at a Duke recruiting event for Latinos, they said, I said to a group of us, I was very excited. I said, oh, it's so much fun that all of us, Mexicans are going to be on campus, and everybody, I'm Argentinian, I'm Boricua. And I said, what is a Boricua? What is it? I just had no sense of sort of the rest of the world, even within the Latino community. And I think it was groups like Mi Gente and sort of being at Duke that really enabled me to sort of take my education both within Latin culture to another level, as well as, generally culturally to another level. Laura, is that enough, or should we keep going?
Oh, no, that's, well, there's a second part of the question that I'm going to continue to ask, but that's really great to hear that Mi Gente was that space for you. So the second part of the question would be how you've arrived at your career today. So a little bit about your career path.
Yeah, so I actually started at Duke as a biomedical engineer. Thought that that's where I wanted to be. I will say that as a freshman, I actually started in a focus program for neuroscience before they had the neuroscience major. And it was sort of during that first semester that I realized, I had gone to a very poor school. They didn't have, calculus, for example. And so it was my first semester of me calling the registrar to sort of say, hey, where can I find Calc 1? Where the registrar said, honey, this is Duke University. You're supposed to learn calculus in high school. And I, kind of went through this experience of trying engineering and realizing that, A, it's a lot of math and science, taught myself frankly, Calc 1 while taking Calc 2. But during this, that I sort of said, I don't really know what I can get out of this. Where do I kind of, when I think about a career path, where do I go? And sort of, given that I'm already here at Duke, I'm a little bit behind and sort of not having had the opportunity to take, you know, higher level classes. And so I said, maybe the best path for me is business. And I actually graduated with a degree in economics, financial concentration. I sit on the Duke Financial Steering Committee now, but I started actually as a sophomore at Goldman Sachs. I sat in the Loop. I think they still have the Loop on campus. And I said one summer, I said, what will I do this summer? I don't have a job. I'd previously spent time doing some science research at the NIMH. And I just, you know, was feverishly looking online, and I was able to secure a couple of internships at Goldman. My path has kind of gone in various ways. I've been on Wall Street for 10 years at Goldman Sachs and a couple of other firms. And I made my way back here about a year ago within the healthcare division. And so, you know, we can go into this probably a little bit later during Q&A, but there, you know, there's no direct path. And, you know, I think a lot of what being at Duke really shaped kind of getting me there.
Thank you, Monique. I'm sure a lot of our students can relate to that sort of feeling fish out of water at Duke at first, but it's really great to hear how you took charge of your career path. And so my second question for you would be, how has your identity played a role in your career aspirations?
I would say my, you know, I would kind of phrase that as identities. I think there are multiple. I think when you're a woman in particular, you know, for a lot of you that are at Duke, I can't see what our group looks like right now, but, you know, the fact of the matter is you're at an Anglo-Saxon school and predominantly Anglo-Saxon school, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think even within our own communities of being Latinx, we're sort of different colors and we sort of come from different backgrounds. And so, you know, my identity really has been twofold. I think one, growing up, you know, Chicana is hard in America in general. But I think too, when you go to a school like Duke, that, you know, you don't see a lot of people like you around, right? And that, going back to my first comment on, I thought, you know, anybody that kind of looked like me was Mexican, and obviously I was very wrong. There actually were not that many Mexicans, but kind of going through that process, you know, I think one thing that we're taught when you come to a school like Duke and people come from different backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, you know, different countries. I think for me, it was, you know, you have this diaspora of growing up in the United States, and you kind of feel like you're not, you know, I recall so many times in high school where they would call me gringa, or, you know, that I'd get made fun of by my own, you know, by other, you know, Mexicans that said, like, your Spanish isn't great. You have, you know, where do you live? You know, my parents, my grandparents are immigrants, and I saw my parents go from really nothing and, you know, 8 kids, and they were in apartments all in East LA, to my parents really working hard and giving us, you know, we didn't have the best, but we had enough. We had what we needed. And kind of seeing that and that identity of not fully feeling like I fit in anywhere, and kind of always feeling like everything that you do is against the grain. And so this sort of story of resilience and sort of overcoming and persevering in the ways that many of our, you know, perhaps grandparents or parents that came here to this country did, was certainly the case for me. And so, you know, even the Calc story that I told was very much, you know, always sort of being told, no, you as a woman and also as a person of color, you can't do this. It's very unlikely. You shouldn't, you probably won't get into Duke. You probably can't work at Goldman Sachs, and sort of always that being the fuel that kind of helped me to continue to push along. And even today, I'll tell you now, where I work, it's, you know, predominantly, you know, you don't see a lot of people like me there. And so kind of continuing that trend on Wall Street, frankly, but also in trying to kind of help bring more students along and into the firm, and to sort of see more of us continue to succeed.
Thank you. I love to hear that. And yes, like there's a lot of intersectionality with different identities in our communities, and that does impact our experiences. So thank you for bringing that up. You've already started to answer this question a bit with some of your earlier answers, but can you give us some of like the biggest lessons that you've learned in your fields or through your career journey?
Yeah, I think the one that I kind of already gave is kind of the overarching theme is you never take no for an answer, right? And I think all of you will experience, whether you either have now to get to this point at Duke, or you will in your future. I'm certain that you probably already have now, is, never take no for an answer. I will say, when I came to the Duke Latino recruitment weekend, I had the best time of my life, and we were front row at a UNC game, Duke game, and what doesn't get more exciting than that, right? But I was just over the threshold where I couldn't get any financial aid, and I couldn't afford it. And my dad said, "Look, you got a full ride to a local state school. That's fine, go there," right? And I said, "No, I'm going to Duke," right? And even and not that my parents told me no, but that they just knew it wasn't really feasible. And I said to my dad, "I will find a way." At Duke recruitment weekend, I went to the financial aid office, and they said, and I was crying, "Please, I'll have to go to a state school." And they just kind of said, "I'm so sorry, we can't help you." I really thought that would work, but it didn't. And I kind of came back, and I committed to going, and I told my parents, I said, "Don't worry, I will find a way." And I applied for over 300 scholarships, all sort of various scholarships, and I was able to self-finance my way through Duke. And I only tell that story to say that kind of the theme of what's made, at least in my own view, me successful, whether other people think you're successful, I think is less. It's more so how you feel about yourself, and that you're sort of staying true to your values. And that's how I measure success. I sort of don't think about just the resume, right? And so for me, I would say it's kind of staying core to my values, even when you have to be in institutions where you may not agree with what those are, right? And so there's things that Duke or other institutions that you may go to in your future that you may not agree with. But I think we are in a unique situation as people of color where it's kind of hard to be in that lane, right? Because you sort of feel like you have to do a certain thing because other people are, or because your group and community sort of are against it. And I think the way that I look at it is, particularly being a woman on Wall Street, is, I'm here to sort of bring other people in. I want to see more people of color. And that's sort of what I feel that I'm called to do. And any space that I'm in is to sort of champion people of color and mentor and sort of make change from within. And I think that's sort of, as you kind of go into the upper echelon of socioeconomic status, I think that's one of the most important things that we can do. And so, that has been sort of the main trend that I would say has sort of followed me throughout my life, my career.
Thank you. And Claribel put in the chat, wow, that is perseverance. And I would just like to say, yes, it is. 300 scholarships. I
was desperate. I already committed to going.
I can't even imagine that. I think I applied to maybe 2. So all the shine to you for that. And also, like, it's really great to hear that, like, you are working towards bringing more people of color into your field. Like, that's exactly what our alum network is about. And so this fourth and final question, what advice can you offer our audience that you wish you knew when you embarked on your career journey while at Duke?
My biggest piece of advice is that, I've kind of given you guys some of the highlights, right? The highlight reel that goes on, in my head, ESPN, or my version of it. But obviously, like, no career is linear, right? And so I think that's the biggest thing. I think, you have goals that you aspire to, we all do. But it's not without, challenges. And I think it's failing at something is really hard, but never having tried and sort of regretting it is worse. And so I think, as you kind of think about that in anything that you do, whether it be, it's actually funny, our CFO at Goldman just resigned, or he retired. And on his LinkedIn, he posted a picture from 70 something, where they rejected him, right? They said, like, you're not suited to work here. And now he became the CFO. And I would say that, similarly, right, have been many things that I think in my career where, I sort of expected it to just, like the stock market, hopefully go up and up and up. And it hasn't always been that way, right? And I think being able to really kind of develop a village around you, right? And, for me, like I said earlier, my parents didn't have a lot, but they had enough. But the main thing that my parents gave me was, in addition to sort of resilience and perseverance, was just support, right? They were always there. And, they were there for me to call and cry on. And I recognize not everybody has that, but sort of developing a village and a community of people that you can go to and be honest about your failures, right? And kind of to help guide you, I think is the most important thing. And whether that's in the way of mentorship at Duke and the various channels that are offered, or in communities like this one, I think that is above and beyond, what going forward will impact you the most. And the things that you do for other people, particularly at Duke, I think it's just a very unique platform to meet, people who are going to be very successful. I mean, you kind of, if you're there, everyone around you is going to be successful in any kind of way. And I would say my biggest probably regret from Duke is that I didn't really expand and take advantage of meeting as many people as I could and developing more network outside of my own little sort of micro communities that I formed and what I was doing. But kind of, as I think through, I just had a wedding a few years ago, all of, mostly Duke people that were there, friends from Duke, and kind of can all sort of speak to some way that we influenced each other throughout our careers and sort of helped each other get to the next level, whether it be throwing someone's resume into your company's recruiting platform, or sort of helping somebody connect to someone else. I think that's super important and carries you for a long time.
I will definitely be keeping that in my mind, and I'm sure that our audience will too. So thank you so much, Monique. We'll definitely be hearing from you during the Q&A. And thank you for having this conversation with me. And now we're going to go on to Maria Cardona. Hi, Maria. How are you doing?
Buenas noches. How are you?
Buenas noches. So I'm going to ask you the same questions, starting with, can you share a bit about yourself? So hometown, Latinx identity, anything else you'd like to share, and how you've arrived at your career today?
Sure, absolutely. And I had to take some notes when Monique was talking, because a lot of what she said, I was laughing, especially at the calculus story, because I have my own. But let's start in terms of how I got to Duke. And I was actually born in Bogota, Colombia, and my parents brought my family to the United States. I see Sebastian, to the United States when I was 2 years old. So I don't really have a memory of my early years in Colombia, other than my parents did bring us back to Colombia every year for, until I was in college. And so I have a memory of spending all of our summers there. So it was wonderful. I got to really know my cousins and friends and aunts and uncles. But I have very early memories of my family in the United States already. And my father was, I guess you could say, one of the privileged few in Colombia. He grew up dirt poor, but then he, really made a huge effort to get ahead, and he was able to go to one of the best universities in Colombia, La Javeriana, and he graduated as an engineer, and he ended up getting a job at an engineering firm here in the States, which is how we got here. He understood that staying in Colombia was not going to give both either him the economic opportunities that he wanted, but more importantly, he would tell us afterward, not really be available to us in an as easy a way as it would be if we moved to the States. Now, that doesn't mean that the move was easy in any way, shape, or form, as we all know, right? Going to somewhere new where you don't know the language, where you don't know anyone. We ended up moving to a small town in central Florida where, at the time there was not the Latino community that exists in Florida now. And, we were one of very, very few other Latino families there at the time. But one of the things that my father really did that made such an impression on me, and I think, I took it as a life lesson. It has really served me well in my career, and I'll explain how, is that he understood that when we got to the neighborhood where we moved, everyone around us was white, and they spoke English, and they had never seen a Latino or a Colombian or anyone that really was different from them before they met us. And so my parents really made an effort to have everybody in our neighborhood understand that we were really no different than them. And that our values were the same, that our aspirations were the same, that we all wanted to live a better life for ourselves, and especially to create opportunities for our children. So I remember, for example, at Christmas time, we pray what is called La Novena. And my father would invite all of our neighbors to come over and pray the novena with us. And part of that is like singing songs, Christmas songs, holiday songs. And I remember it became such a thing that my dad and the custom of praying La Novena got written up in our town newspaper. And so it was things like this that, really showed me that in an environment where people look at you skeptically, you should open up yourself to make yourself understood and to accept people the way that they are as well. And so that notion really served me well. Fast forward, my family ended up staying in Florida until I was in probably junior high school. And then we moved to Puerto Rico. So I did high school. And then I was living in Puerto Rico when I was applying for college. And so Duke was one of the schools that just really stood out to me. I thought the campus was beautiful. I worked with a lovely and amazing guidance counselor at the time, who really focused on me, thankfully. I really wanted to go to college. In my family, it was kind of a given, thankfully, that me and my brothers were going to go to college. My older brother was at Georgia Tech in a career in engineering. And, my father, again, thankfully, I know I'm one of the very few privileged, had the means to send us to these schools. And so I decided to go to Duke, and I went in there thinking I had wanted to be a veterinarian all my life. And so I went in thinking I was going to do pre-med. My very first calculus class, I stood there and I went, holy fucking shit. I have never done this before in my life. And Monique, like what she was saying, I was laughing because my school in Puerto Rico was supposedly one of the best. It was a private Catholic school. But looking back, I always now say, oh my God, it was a horrible curriculum, and it really did not prepare me for what I was, all of a sudden was facing at Duke. And I had a 4.0. The highest level of math at my high school in Puerto Rico was trigonometry. To them, that was advanced math. And so when I got to Duke, I was like, oh, I'm super smart. I'm really good at math. They had pre-calc at the time. I guess that doesn't exist anymore, interestingly enough. I decided not to take pre-calc because I was like, I'm so good at math. I got a 4.0, this is going to be easy. And so then, to Monique's point, the teacher that taught calculus, Calc 1 at Duke, was not a teacher at all. He was a TA, because he assumed that everyone in that class had already taken calculus. As was the case, most of my classmates, probably every single one in that class, had already taken a year of calculus. And so I was like, oh my God, what have I got myself into? It was the first time I got a C. I was like so ashamed. I cried. I was like, what am I doing here? I had such self-doubt, all of it. So anyway, I had to ponerme los pantalones and just be like, okay, I had to work harder than I've ever worked in my life, which is obviously, was good for me, because up until then I clearly had coasted and didn't really, know what, super hard work was. So in that way, I thank God that was my experience at Duke, because that also really prepared me for later on, what I was going to be facing in my career. My dad also, with sort of his own experiences when he became head engineer at the Florida Telephone Company, which was, a big promotion and opportunity that he had gotten, the first Hispanic to have that position at the Florida Telephone Company. And we were just talking about sort of his career path one day. And I asked him, if he thought that it was, how sort of, what was his feeling about being like the first Hispanic to have that position, and, that he was at the seat of, where the decisions were making, of decision-making table, et cetera, and how did that happen? And he looked at me and he's like, Mijita, it never occurred to me to ask for permission to be at this table. I was not invited to this table. I simply pulled up a chair. And that, to me, that just like stayed with me, throughout my career. And, since then, we've just always had these conversations, because he was a trailblazer in his own right. And he said, he always had doubters because of the way he looked, because of the way he spoke. He had a heavy accent. And people always assumed a lot less than what he was able to bring to the table, which I think both surprised everyone. And at the same time, he was able to change people's minds about what Hispanics were and their role in this country really early on. And so all of that stayed with me throughout my, Duke experience, and then my early career. But going back to Duke, as I was waiting for this event to start, I texted one of my dearest friends from Duke, and I'll talk about that in a second, who is a Cubana. And I said to her, I was like, hey, Rosa, so we've talked about this before, but I just want to make sure that I am still remembering this correctly. You and I, we had a good friend also in our class named Manuel Monasterio, Puerto Riqueño. Do you remember any other Latinos at Duke at that time? And she texted me back and she's like, oh my God, no. She's like, is that nuts? And I'm like, yeah, that's crazy. And I totally remember, like, I think I knew maybe 5 other Latinos on campus. We didn't have DULA, didn't exist. We didn't have, you all have been talking about Mi Gente, that did not exist. There was no Latino, nothing student association whatsoever. I did not have the opportunity to go to a Latino recruitment, event for Duke. We were all on our own. And so it was interesting because there was never any Latino focused events. There was never any Latino focused anything, which is probably why I'm sure there were probably more than 10 Latinos at Duke when we were there, but there was nothing there and never an effort to try to connect us. I got to know Rosa just out of happenstance, right? She became a really good friend of mine through other friends in my freshman dorm. And so it's just so interesting to me how things have changed, luckily for the better, and that you all have been able to create all of these support systems, because that is so incredibly important, not just to get through a college experience, but also in one's career. And I experienced that same thing when I got out of college. And so anyway, so let me go back to talk about my career path before I talk about getting out of college. So after that experience with calculus, I had a similar experience with biology. And of course, if I was going to be a veterinarian, these had to be the classes that I took. So I went into biology, and same thing happened. I had taken the advanced biology class at my high school. I had gotten 4.0. When I went to this, it was like, oh my God, what is this, right? Again, same thing. I ended up doing okay, but it really changed my thinking in terms of what I wanted to do. And I don't know if it was because I thought to myself, I can't do this, or whether it was really because I started taking other classes. I took political science, I took public policy, and I really enjoyed those. And that, in my heart of hearts, that was what I was really meant to do. I hope it was that and not the former. I think it was, because I clearly feel like, what I'm doing is what I was meant to do. But it's interesting to me that was my experience, and that was Monique's experience. And to me, it says a lot about the the preparation of like K through 12 of, you know, in Monique's case of poor Latino neighborhoods in the United States, and then in my case, Puerto Rico, like in general, right? I mean, and that was a private high school that I was at. Imagine the public education system in Puerto Rico. I mean, just, it blows my mind. But anyway, so I get to Duke, and I had an amazing experience. You know, yes, I had to work really hard, which was great. You know, you're supposed to do that. But I also was able to, because I did not find sort of my own village, if you will, from a Latino perspective, I still made one, and I am still dear, dear friends with 10 other Duke women that have been my besties throughout my whole life. And we still go to trips together. We still, you know, we went to each other's weddings, and, you know, sadly, we had to go to our first funeral a couple of years ago, but we have been through it all. And again, to Monique's point, one of those women just got elected to the Supreme Court of Wisconsin. And one of those women is an award-winning author for children's books. And so, you know, to her point, you are going to meet all these people, and including yourselves, they're going to be extremely successful. And hold on to those friendships, because you never know both when they're going to need your help and when you are going to need their help professionally, but also personally. I can't tell you the amount of time that I've picked up the phone to call one of these women to either, you know, gripe with at the end of a hard day, cry with because, you know, I'm going through something or they're going through something, you know, laugh with, drink with, and just, you know, essentially share life experiences, even though now we're all separated. But the effort to get together, and when we get together, we still talk about, you know, I don't know if any of these places are still there, but like Bryan Center, we talk about Cameron, we talk about the Rathskeller, we talk about the Oak Room, we talk about like all these things, right? And we all talk about how different Duke is now, but still just how it holds such an incredibly important place in our hearts. So when I left Duke, I ended up, one of the things that also really changed my trajectory was I became a public policy major. And one of the requirements to graduate as a public policy major was that you had to do an internship between junior and senior year in Washington at either a nonprofit, a political entity, or another, like an issue-oriented campaign. And so I ended up getting an internship at the Department of Commerce. And I came here to DC with a big group of my friends, you know, many of which were in this group of women friends that I've been telling you about. And so we spent a wonderful summer in DC, and I fell in love with it. And I was like, this is where I want to end up, no matter what. Like, that is what I put my mind to. It's like, I'm going to use my public policy major. I'm going to use my language skills. I realized that being bilingual just set me apart from so many people, especially at that point. And so I ended up doing that. The internship that I got connected me to a lot of people that really helped me once I moved here to really find the place where I ended up. And that was getting a job as the Hispanic media director at the Democratic and National Committee. And that was the beginning. That was where I started cutting my teeth on politics and press and communications. And then really understanding, you know, what I brought to the table as a young Latina back then, at a time when really being Latino or Latina wasn't the cool thing to be yet. But being with people, my boss, for example, at the time, who was the chairman of the Democratic Party, understood, he was the first African-American to have that role. He understood the importance of diversity. And he understood that the future of not just the Democratic Party, but the country as a whole was going to lie in the growth of the Latino population. And so he gave me all these amazing opportunities. He got tapped to be the first African-American Commerce Secretary. He brought me with him over to the Department of Commerce. I worked as a Clinton appointee for 8 years during the Clinton administration. And then after that, I went on to be communications director at the DNC. So I felt like I came full circle. And then I started to, and then I worked for 2 years at a nonprofit and issue campaign for the Democrats. And then I started at the firm where I am now, and I started doing political commentary on television, starting out in Espanol on Univision and Telemundo, CNN Espanol. That really paved the way for me to do it in English too. And so now I do it, I'm on an exclusive contract with CNN and CNN Espanol. So it has been quite a ride, but it has been amazing. And it has been amazing to see how the Latino community has grown in these past several decades. And I just, right before this, I was on another virtual program that was celebrating Latinos in PR. And, you know, we talked a lot about the census figures that just came out and just what incredible opportunities there are now to be a Latino in this country. So.
Thank you so much, Maria. Thank you so much for everything that you've said, sharing so much about your journey at Duke and beyond. I'm actually also Colombian, so we'll talk about that later. And I'm sure we'll hear more during our Q&A, but right now we're going to transition to our next panelist, Sebastian.
Hello, hello. Can you hear me okay?
Hello, yes, I can hear you perfectly.
Awesome.
Yes, it's good to be here. So first, again, can you share a little bit about yourself, your hometown Latinx identity, and how you've arrived at your career today?
Yeah. So let's see. So I was born in Bucaramanga, Colombia. Actually,
Another Colombian.
I know, I love it. It's a little crew right here.
Love it.
Back in 1991, and yeah, no, my dad was actually a lawyer, and my mom she just, you know, lived in the home. Unfortunately, due to a kind of an accident, my dad did pass away when I was about 6 years old, and my mom was faced a pretty tough decision because everybody was telling her, you know, just use the little bit of money that you have to buy a school van and help transport kids to and from school. This is like what you can do. You can drive. Okay, so how about you do that to support you and your 4 kids? She says that according to her, she had a dream that God told her that she should try to move to America. And that's what she tried to do. She borrowed her sister's suitcase, jacket, and all that good stuff, went to Bogota, applied to become a resident, or applied to be able to travel to America. And even though she had so many kids, she got the visa, and, you know, kind of like the rest is history, except not really. That was only the beginning. We moved to Miami when I was about 7 years old, and she started paying rent from the first day that we were there. And it was me and my 2 siblings, because the other 2 were over 18, so that their visa didn't apply. That's a whole other story. But yeah, no, my siblings were about 15 and 16, so they also helped clean houses and, you know, take care of kids with my mom. I was about 7, and so I kind of just, you know, stayed in the background, watched them work, and saw all of the hard work that they put into their daily living in order for us to thrive. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment for most of my childhood. I think I start this conversation not about me, but about my mom, because I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her. I model my life based on what she did and what she taught me. At this point in time, you know, she's actually the small business owner in Miami, and my siblings are very successful as well. They didn't even graduate high school, but they managed to, you know, find their way to the top in their own professions. So yeah, so that's a little bit about, yes, Latina moms, 100%. So like I said, I kind of watched their hard work, and through high school, I was kind of like the shy little kid, and somehow I became valedictorian of my public high school in South Florida, which was really exciting. And something that funny story about how I decided to go to Duke was just because I thought it sounded really cool, which is kind of funny, but also a little, you know, it shows that I didn't have that much guidance. My mom provided me with a lot of love, but she didn't know much about like academic guidance and advising and things like that. So I just chose the schools, I chose Harvard and Duke and all these schools that sounded cool. And luckily, because of LSRW, or the Latino Student Recruitment Weekend, I don't know if you guys still call it that, that was the reason why I kind of set my mind to Duke, because I had such a good time during that weekend. I met so many Hispanic and Latinos, and that was the reason why I chose Duke at the end of the day. Kind of jumping into Duke, quick funny story about calculus actually is that even though I was valedictorian, I took 14 AP classes, Duke somehow only accepts 1 or 2, and I was like, calculus. I'm like, I'm gonna skip that one. That's the one I'm not gonna do, based on what I heard about how hard math is at Duke. So it sounds like I kind of saved myself a big one there. But yeah, no, I actually, relating to Monique, what she mentioned about seeing fewer Mexicans. In Miami, there are very few Mexicans. So when I moved to Durham, I was surprised by how many Mexicans there were over there. And it was kind of like a big culture shock, because I felt like, I was from Miami, Puerto Ricans, Colombians, Venezuelans, the whole gamut, not as many Mexicans. So another kind of side thing is that I was vice president of Mi Gente back in the day. I think it was like 2012. And I did a Latinx now stereotypes campaign. And actually Birdie was part of it. She shared that, she doesn't know much about salsa, I believe, but that she was a good ballerina. And so it's kind of like breaking the stereotype that all Hispanic people have to know, salsa and merengue. She's a ballet dancer, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, Birdie. But mine, because I was so naive about like Mexican culture, was me literally staring at a taco and being like, I don't even know the difference between a taco and a burrito, which was very true back then. But I'm so embarrassed to say it now, because it's like, how did I not know that? Just based on the fact that I wasn't that accustomed to Mexican culture to the point that I didn't even know the difference between a taco and a burrito. But during my time at Duke, I was pretty involved with Mi Gente. I had to give back to the Hispanic community. I also attended Common Ground, which was a retreat back then. I don't know if you guys still have that. It's like a diversity immersion retreat where we kind of talked about race, gender, sexuality, all that fun stuff, religion, and had kind of like deep heart-to-hearts during that like retreat for about 3 to 4 days. And I facilitated that retreat for about 5 times during those semesters. Oh, you still have it? Amazing. That makes me so happy. So that's kind of when I started learning more about the fact that, for example, that's when I came out at Duke. I'm a member of the LGBT community. I came out because of my friends at Duke, all the support I have. Actually, my roommate currently is my best friend from Duke. I love her. And so that's kind of a little bit about why Duke, my backstory. In regards to why I am a dental student now, the journey has been a little crazy. But I actually, like everybody else, I think here wanted to be pre-med first. And I did do all the medical school requirements. They're the same thing for dental school. But I actually shadowed a psychiatrist, which is what I wanted to do, it was like a mental asylum for the criminally insane, basically about 30 minutes away from Durham. And even though I had an amazing experience that summer, I realized that, at least for me, psychiatry was a lot about, indirectly impacting your patients by like upping doses, lowering doses. I kind of wanted to be a little bit more hands-on with my approach. I wanted to see and affect change in my patients' well-being with my own hands. And that's kind of what dentistry has ultimately allowed me to do. That being said, I actually did not go straight to dental school after Duke. I worked for about 4 years at Epic, which is actually a pretty common company if you're interested in like healthcare and IT, and you don't want to go straight into medical or dental school or PA school. Epic is a good stepping stone. So feel free to ask me any questions, not just about dental school, but about medical school and all the other healthcare professions. But I worked there, and it was great because it gave me some maturity. I lived in Madison, Wisconsin. It gave me a little bit of money, which was very nice, not something I was very accustomed to. And yeah, and I remember one thing that actually is something worth bringing out is that my last semester at Duke, I failed my Gen Chem 2 class. I got a D in it. And so I was like, you know what? I really want to do this for myself. Long-term, I see myself as a dentist. And so I ended up retaking that class and I aced it. I got like 100% in the midterm one time after I went to Epic. So it just goes to show, like if you really want it, a D is not going to count for your pre-med requirements. So I retook it, aced it. And, the day that I got into Columbia was a very happy day for me. and my mom. We both started crying, hugging each other. And now I'm in my 4th year. And actually, even though I thought I was going to do just dentistry, I'm actually applying for residency to become an oral and maxillofacial surgeon. So I just submitted my applications today, and wish me luck. We'll see what happens. But yeah, during my time at Columbia, I served as president of the Hispanic Student Dental Association. And so we give back to the Washington Heights community here, which is heavily Hispanic. We started doing Spanish classes at Columbia for our classmates, just so they could be able to better speak to those Spanish speaking patients, which is about 20 to 25% of our population. So yeah, I feel like I started at a certain place, and it's really always very important to never forget where you started, because giving back is pretty much the most rewarding thing that I've experienced thus far. But yeah, feel free to ask me more questions. Sorry.
No, that was all very amazing and a very inspiring story. So thank you very much for sharing that. And I will jump to our final question, just so we have enough time for the Q&A. So what advice can you offer our audience that you wish you knew when you embarked on your career journey while at Duke?
Yeah, so I think that one thing that I've noticed about a lot of immigrant folks is that we really like to work hard, but we like to work in silos. We like to work by ourselves, and we think we can achieve it all by ourselves. And something that I realized throughout this process, and even I'm still working on it really, is just like realizing that mentors are okay. Having people to support you and teach you the ropes, that's completely fine. Having that support system is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you know exactly what you're doing. And so, like I said, my siblings didn't graduate high school, but they still, they're really great at what they do. And it's because they hustled. So I think that's something that we should always just do, is just hustle. And in Colombia, in Spanish in Colombia, we call it ser vivo. To be vivo, it means like you got to hustle, you got to work your way to the top, you got to wedge your way into any opportunity that you have. And that includes, for me at least, I had the most trouble with, sticking to mentors, reaching out, finding help, and having that guidance, and realizing that it's not just you, it's this community building each other up and supporting each other as a whole.
Thank you so much for that piece of advice. I very much agree with you. And that's partly why we're building all these communities on campus that like you yourself were a part of. And thank you for serving as vice president of Gente. It's a lot of work.
I loved it. It was awesome.
Yeah. So now I'm going to open this for the Q&A for everyone. We actually have our first question. Anyone can take this. Sebastian already began to answer it. So we've spent a lot of time thinking about the journey behind you and what got you to your place now. So what do you hope the journey is ahead of you? Or anything you're looking forward to, whether it's in your career or your involvement in the Latina community?
So
good question. Well, I, for one, hope to continue do more of what I'm doing now. One of the things that I get so much satisfaction out of is when I get, in emails or comments on my social media from young Latinas that tell me that it is so great to see a Latina on national television speaking about everything, right? So great that I'm there to talk about immigration. Great that I'm there to talk about the Latino vote. But, they love it when I'm there talking about the economy or Afghanistan or, the border crisis or, presidential politics and strategy and how to run a presidential campaign, all of those things that they have like CNN or, the other networks have not pigeonholed me to just talk about quote unquote Latino issues. And so I would like not just to do more of that myself, but to open doors for other Latinos and Latinas to do that as well. And so one of the things that I try to do a lot of is to bring in more Latinas and Latinos into the commentating space, because I still think there are way too few Latinos in those spaces. Like even, CNN, I think has done a good job in terms of representing Latinos. They just gave, Jim Acosta a show. Boris Sanchez has a show on Saturdays and Sundays. Ana Cabrera now has her own show during the day. But in terms of commentary, there are still very few Latinos or Latinas who are doing it. MSNBC has very few Latinas and Latinos who are doing it. Fox News, who knows, probably very few. And so I still think that it is a space where there should be so much more Latino representation, again, given the what we represent from a population standpoint and what our numbers represent. And so, you can't be what you can't see. And so when young Latinas are able to see me and then able to say, I can do that, that to me, that is like, there is no better high for that. And Sebastian and Laura, you guys will appreciate this. When I was back in Colombia a couple of years ago, we were leaving the airport in Bogota, El Dorado, and this man started running towards me, and my husband got a little concerned, and he was like, almost gonna like block him, and he's like, Señora Maria, Señora Maria, and I was like, okay, I think he's okay. I was like, sí, y dice, muchas gracias por todo lo que usted hace por los latinos en la televisión. And I was like, oh my God, he like recognized me from my work in CNN Español. And he was like, usted es una héroe para mis hijas. Mis hijas saben que ellas pueden llegar a hacer lo que ellas quieran por usted. I started crying like right there on the spot. And so to me, that is what I want to do more of. And you all are doing all of that as well in your own trajectories and in your own careers, because they are all careers where there is a dearth of Latinos and Latinas, where it is still, mostly white men. And so, I congratulate all of you all for continuing to do that as well.
I think something beautiful is that really, as Latinos, like, all we really have to do sometimes is almost just show up to work, have your face shown, because these beautiful faces right here in my screen, they're not that commonly found in the field of, banking and media and healthcare. And hopefully by just showing our face, we will be able to inspire and represent and show that, we can do this, and hopefully pave the way for more people that look like us to be able to achieve what we have been able to.
Right, agreed.
Well, I appreciate your question, Laura, and both Sebastian, Maria. I think you both are sharing really great points. I would like to share an unpopular opinion, which I think is, in our community, they call us Latinx, Hispanic. I don't know what they're sort of merging names now. I would like us to be more united. I think, one of the common misconceptions amongst non-Latinos or Hispanics is that, even in my narrow view, right, everybody's Mexican or Colombian, we are still a very sort of divided group, right? And whereas you see other groups, such as for me, the African-American community on campus was actually the community that really embraced me. I actually did not really feel that welcome by mi gente in 2000, from 2012, right? Or 2008 to 2012, I didn't really feel that welcome, right? My Spanish wasn't so good. They had events that were much more international, people from Argentina, Colombia bringing their foods that I couldn't really, I just sort of was not an international student. And so for me, being Hispanic in America was a very different experience. I couldn't relate to having lived in a third world country, whether, rich or poor. And I would say, it's great to see that folks are coming together now and it continue to, right? Not Sebastian, you weren't president when I was there, but just not in any kind of negative way, but I think, Chicanos in particular have a little bit of a different experience, or anybody who's sort of first generation here has a little bit of a different experience. I think even within our own cultures, we have, different colors of skin and there's sort of colorism that kind of reigns through communities. in our countries. And so I think for me, one of the things that really stood out was my dad tells a story, and he says sometimes we Latinos can be, not want to help each other up, right? We want to be the only one in the room. And I certainly experienced that. I think I got to Goldman as an intern. I was very naive, pretty much contacted sort of every, like senior Latino person. And I was actually surprised that many of them really did not want to help me. And I kind of thought, we're Latinos, why wouldn't you want, like, it's very natural because, Maria, because you're Latina, of course you want to help me. Your name is Maria, but it's not, that's not the way it works. Right. And so I think we are progressing and things are changing. But for me, it really was actually the African-American community that could sort of relate a little bit more to not fitting in and sort of, being a bit, for me, where I grew up, like I was one of the darker people where I grew up, but actually the African-American community also at at Goldman was really the people who really helped me accelerate and mentored me. And so for me, my personal mission is to kind of, although we all have a lot of differences, I think, whether I lived in Miami too, Sebastian, very, politically very different than what, the California, right, amongst Latinos. And so I think just continuing to find avenues that we recognize that there are subgroups within our community. And that's okay. And finding ways to really unite and help each other and lift each other up, because that's sort of what I think will be is a current pitfall that we have within any field, is that there isn't necessarily that people think because, South America, Central America, they all speak Spanish, they're all friends, just because of history. It's not necessarily that way, right? And so for us here, as a group and a community, to come forward and really try to unite in the way that we say, that we are united. And I think to continue to see that and sort of be a force that sort of opens the door for those conversations, I think is super important.
Monique, that's not an unpopular point of view. It's a realistic one, and you're absolutely right. I experienced that too, and in fact, I gave a speech once about that, kind of scolding Latinas mostly, because that's what I experienced, that we suffer from crabs in a barrel syndrome, where we think that, the pie is so limited that if I'm successful, that, that I have to be, if I'm successful, that you can't be successful. And if you're successful, that means that I'm not going to be successful. So I'm going to keep you, if you're climbing up out of the barrel, I'm going to pull you down so I can get up, right?
That's the story my dad tells, Maria.
Yes, absolutely. And it is so toxic. And at a point in our history when we need to be more united than ever before, because while we might amongst ourselves have differences as a Colombiana and as a Mexicana, the person who is looking at Latinos as a threat are looking at all of us as a threat without distinguishing where we come from. And so we need to unite because we have so much more in common, especially as Latinos in this country. And in fact, the word Latino doesn't really exist in Latin America, because in Latin America, there are no Latinos. There are Colombianos, Mexicanos, Salvadoreños, Venezolanos. But Latino is a word that actually was conceived to try to describe a commonality of people that come from Central and South America in this country, and the commonly lived experiences of us all. That doesn't mean that we're all alike. In fact, I hope it means that that you are able to teach Sebastian the difference between a burrito and a taco, right? that he is able to show you what a bandeja paisa is, and that we can all enjoy tequila and aguardiente, right? And so that to me should be our goal. And so to your point, I absolutely salute you for bringing that up, because we need to learn to do that much more than we have historically, especially now that our numbers represent what they represent. We are never going to claim the political power that we can claim the same way that the African American community has claimed if we don't learn to unite this way.
Absolutely.
That's a very great thought to end on. So thank you. I think we definitely need to learn to embrace our internal differences. Thank you to each one of our panelists. Thank you, Sebastian, Maria, and Monique. This has been a really great conversation, and I'm going to pass it over to Viridiana for our ending.
Great, thank you so much. Again, thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you to Laura, our moderator, for your time and for guiding that conversation, and for all the panelists for sharing your experiences with us. And thank you for the audience for your engagement during this time. So this year marks the 10th anniversary of doula being formally established. So we look forward to sharing more programming with you this year in celebration of this milestone. If you enjoyed today's programming, please be sure to follow doula and all your favorite social media platforms, and to join our listserv, be sure to add doula to your groups on the Duke Alumni Network. Again, thank you so much for being with us this evening. We look forward to seeing you again in the near future.